Good morning, Ichigo, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 9 of Bleach, episode review with your host, Griever, as always. Now, this episode had some good moments, but it's a lot different than the manga. There's a scene that we get much later, if I'm recalling correctly, from the manga, and just in case, I won't spoil it, but just in case. I said that these episode reviews would be spoiler, heavy. They would not pretend that you guys have not read all of Bleach, that you don't know the ending, that you don't know this, that, and the other thing. But there is a scene that I'm pretty sure it involves Grand Fisher at the end of Volume 3, I think. Maybe beginning of Volume 4. Either way, it's where we run into Grand Fisher after this fight. Right, and all that stuff. So the foreshadowing for arcs that happen later. That scene isn't here. That scene isn't here at all, in fact. We just get Grand Fisher running away. But this, of course, was handled much different. Karin is in Grand Fisher's grasp here. The filler character, the Shinigami, I forget his name, the Soul Reaper, he defends her and stuff, and he has some conversations with Rukia and such, and he basically leaves back to the Soul Society. The battle pretty much goes the same way, though. Ichigo talks about how this is personal. This is a personal fight after he finds out that the little girl that he tried to save from jumping in the river was actually just the tailfin. That's why they call him Grand Fisher, because he uses it like a lure, like fishing. He uses a little girl's form as a lure to try to lure in said people with high amounts of spiritual pressure, because people with high spirit energy are able to see said lure. And if they see said lure, then it makes, of course, the meal taste better. And they collect more power. He also has the ability to turn invisible as such, and also the ability to take the form, apparently, with this lure of... It's left a little unclear. Maybe the manga clears it up. But that he's able to take on the person that he's fighting against, and take on the form of the person that they love, or the person that they won't be able to harm, and that's how he deceives them, gets in a couple of cheap shots and pieces if he's being overwhelmed. It's left unclear whether he's able to do this for any soul, because, like, for example, could he turn into Karin? He's touched Karin, but he hasn't been able to eat her yet. We know that he, of course, is the one who killed, but I guess he didn't really eat Masaki. I don't know. It's kind of... It's a little odd, that one, but apparently he can metamorphosis, he can shapeshift the lure into the face of anyone, I guess, that he's come across, as long as he knows what the face looks like. It appears that way. Anyways, it's not a big deal. The battle goes on, that Ichigo is actually overwhelmed, and this is one of the good parts of Bleach. This is one of what I really enjoy about Bleach early on, is that we automatically have the character. He just got his superpowers, and he seems to be handling himself pretty well. Pretty well for a guy who's, from all intents and purposes, never swung a sword before. He's a delinquent, he's a fighter, but he's not exactly a kendo trained master since the time he was small, like a lot of shonen protagonists, Oh, well, my grandfather owns a dojo, and I've been training with him, and that grandfather just happens to be one of the strongest people in the verse. That's not exactly what's happening here. So it's nice to see, in all honesty, he encounters a hollow that is an actual threat. This isn't just some Fishbone D or some no-name hollow. This is Grand Fisher, a hollow that has been able to evade and slaughter multiple Soul Reapers, full-fledged Soul Reapers, for over 50 years. They have a name for him and everything. He's very elusive. He's on their wanted list, and he's very difficult to track down, and when tracked down, hard to kill. So I like the fact that even though this is the very classic shonen revenge story, he killed his mother, this is a personal fight, he's going to fight in the rain, and he's going to take the blows, and he's going to avenge his mother's death. The great thing about this episode, and we do see Rukia here, I find this kind of weird because Grand Fisher is a higher level hollow than the ones we've come across up to this point in the series. However, I find it very odd that she is able to, because remember when she fought against Chad, or she didn't fight against Chad, but she fought with Chad against the bat sort of hollow, the one that was all about turning boys into birds and all that stuff. She wasn't able to use her Keto very well. It was basically a light scratch. It did nothing to a low-level hollow. Meanwhile, and she did full incantation and the whole bit. Meanwhile, she uses a level 9 Keto here with full incantation to actual effect on Grand Fisher. I always found that odd because she was unable to utilize her power back then, but now she is. I'm just a little curious. I mean, you could make the argument that of course, the soul energy, the soul candy, not soul candy because that's the stuff that Ichigo takes, but the stuff that becomes toxic if she takes too much of it, the spirit energy pills or whatever that Kisuke gave her. Perhaps she was full loaded at that point and she was much, 40% or 20% or whatever. We know kind of the reason why this is happening. We all do. But I just found it odd that she was actually able to stop Grand Fisher for even a few seconds, even a moment, and actually freeze him in place. That was actually really impressive. A couple other things. We did actually get a shot of Uketake here. We get Uketake's first introduction. Of course, we don't see his face. We don't know his name. We don't know about captains or lieutenants or anything yet. But it's, of course, the conversation that Uketake had with Rukia in regards to Kai and Shiba way back when. And this is where, when Rukia is asked to stay out of it, she stays out of the battle for honor. And that's what Ichigo's doing right now. He's doing the exact same fight, and Rukia is once again a bystander, an observer of said fight. She's been asked not to interfere for the battle of honor. It's very interesting. It's a very much Warriors Code sort of thing. We don't see a whole lot of that happening, and people have made arguments that, well, come on, but look at what happened, but there is some merit to it, a bit of a warrior's pride, a warrior's honor. It does mean something to people who fight for justice, who fight, who do all that stuff. It's an old-fashioned concept, but it still applies here. So, and of course, Soul Reapers, usually very old and very traditional in that sense, so I kind of get it. But that's really cool. We get Uketake for the first time. But going back to my original point, he loses against Grand Fisher. He gets a couple of good blows on him, but at the end of the day, Ichigo was pretty overwhelmed by Grand Fisher. Grand Fisher did a lot more damage to Ichigo than Ichigo did to Grand Fisher. And Grand Fisher, of course, taking the form of Misaki and all that stuff, but in the end, runs away and swears revenge. Now, as I said, there's a scene in the manga that happens at this junction. We see that scene, I believe, later on in the Arrancar arc. We see that scene later on when it becomes relevant. We don't see it here. Probably just not to confuse the viewers, as they kind of changed up a few things, especially in this episode, more heavily than most. So they changed up quite a few things, and short of the fight, and probably just to leave it at that. Now, I really like that concept, because now we have, as I said, the big guy with the sword and stuff, but now he's come across a hollow that this thing is no joke. And Ichigo is not a fully trained Shinigami. He does not have all these powers or anything yet. It just has the bare bones and is able to kick down some low-level fodder hollows just to save a couple of souls and a couple of kids. But something like Grand Fisher, he just can't take on yet. He does not have the training. He hasn't been trained. He doesn't have the Rayleigh, the Master Roshi training yet. He doesn't have that yet. So in this case, it's Kisuke. But none of that has happened. All he is doing is swinging around his sword wildly and just going on fighter instinct. That's all he's doing for right now. And it really puts him outmatched against something like Grand Fisher. And I really like that, because there are multiple times in the first arc of this series, which is only 15 episodes in the anime, but for the 14, 15 episodes, Ichigo actually loses a fight. Like, I would count this as an L. It's a bit of a tie. Grand Fisher ran away, but Ichigo took the more damage. So Ichigo basically lost. He couldn't avenge his mother's death. This didn't happen. And Then, of course, later on, he loses to Byakuya and Renji sort of idea. And that right there, already, we're seeing a double loss in the very first arc, in the beginning of the series, in the setup part of the series. That, generally speaking, that doesn't happen. Luffy doesn't lose his fights in the East Blue. He wins every single fight in the East Blue. He wins them all. Naruto, I don't remember too much, but Toriko doesn't really lose any fights at the beginning of the series. Natsu from Fairy Tail doesn't lose very many fights. Beelzebub, Olga doesn't lose a lot of fights. Soma doesn't lose any fights. It's from Food Wars. Generally speaking, characters don't lose fights, especially meaningful ones like avenge his mother's death fight. Does not lose, not once, but twice in the first arc. That is what makes, in my opinion, Bleach a little more realistic in that sense, but a little just more down to earth. I can grasp it more, and you can take multiple characters seriously, that this is a threat. He's not just killing the villain of the week. This isn't Power Rangers where Rita puts wand, make my monster grow, Megazord, big battle, and they win every single episode. No, they're going to lose some episodes. And it doesn't need to be a season-ending thing for them to lose. So I just wanted to say that. I really enjoyed that. Last point I want to make, because that's really the whole of Bleach. That's, I think, part of why I like it, looking back now, is that Ichigo was not an overpowered, friendship wins, just cookie-cutter shonen protagonist. He has the traits, but the story allows it that he is not the be-all and end-all from the very beginning. We grow into Ichigo. Now, say what you want later on, that he's basically a bit of every race in the series, but that doesn't happen for over hundreds of chapters. Right here at the beginning, he's just a 15-year-old kid, a little more mature for a 15-year-old, but 15-year-old kid, got Soul Reaper powers, and is able to kick a little bit of ass. But he can't go above that. Not yet. And that to me, I really enjoy. So, last little part, Isshin Kurosaki. Really like Isshin. Of course, we all like Isshin. But we do get the first time, I guess, we have a real conversation with Isshin. Isshin, of course, at the mother's grave there, talking to Ichigo, saying, I can't blame you. They have a father to son, heart to heart. It's nice. We get the classic line where he says, I look cool holding a cigarette. It's one of the first compliments she ever gave me. It might have been the only compliment your mother ever gave me. So I always decide to smoke one cigarette, at her grave and such. And he tells him that he's too young to hold on to all this guilt. We don't blame you. It's not your fault. People die. It happens. And sometimes it's not anybody's fault. You were a kid. It wasn't your fault that happened. You didn't do anything wrong. So basically get over yourself. Grow old. Die old. Have a couple of kids. Grow bald. Do all that stuff and do it with a smile on your face. It was a really good father to son conversation. I liked it. And that's basically where the episode ends. Rukia and Ichigo have a little talk where Ichigo basically says, I need to be a Soul Reaper a little longer. I need to be a protector. I need to do this so I can continue, so I can finally face my mother again one day. So, really good episode. Very emotional. Concludes the Grand Fisher stuff. So now we're on to the next set. I think this is probably my least favorite episodes coming up. The Donkanonji, I believe. Wah-ha-ha-ha! I believe are the next episodes. 10 and 11 probably. So, yeah, I'm so looking forward to that. I could be wrong, but I think those are the next ones. And then we get some good ones again with the introduction, though we've already seen him, Uryu, who we've seen in class a couple of times, but throughout these episodes. But he'll show up for his big moment later on. Or it could be reversed, I'm not sure. But either way, that's this episode, guys. What did you think? Like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you back here next time. This has been Griever with Bleach Episode 9 Review. See you guys.